Three Englishmen were in a bar and spotted an Irishman. One of them said, "I'm gonna wind him up." He walked over, tapped the Irishman on the shoulder, and said, "I hear St. Patrick was a no-good wife-beater." The Irishman said, "Oh, really? Didn't know that." The man went back, confused. "I insulted St. Patrick and he didn't care." The second Englishman said, "You're doing it wrong. Watch this." He went over and said, "I hear St. Patrick was a no-good drunk." The Irishman replied, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Thanks for telling me." The Englishman came back shocked. "You're right. He doesn't react to anything." The third Englishman said, "I'll get him." He walked over, tapped the Irishman on the shoulder, and said, "I hear St. Patrick was an Englishman." The Irishman smiled and said, "Yeah, that's what your friends were trying to tell me." A Native American chief needed to borrow $1,000, so he went to the local bank to speak with the loan officer. "Banker, what are you going to do with the money?" Chief, "Buy silver, make jewelry, and then sell it." Banker, "And what do you have for collateral?" Chief, "I don't know what collateral is." The banker explained, "Collateral is something valuable we hold in case you can't pay back the loan. Do you have any livestock?" Chief, "I have a horse." Banker, "How old is the horse?" Chief, "Don't know, it has no teeth." After a few more questions, the banker finally found something he could use as collateral and approved the loan. A few weeks later, the chief returned, pulled out a roll of $100 bills, and handed the banker $1,000. Banker, "Business must be good. What are you going to do with the rest of the money?" Chief, "Keep it close to me." Banker, "Why don't you deposit it in our bank?" Chief, "I don't know what a deposit is." The banker explained, "You put the money in our bank, we take care of it, and you can take it out whenever you need it." The chief leaned across the desk, looked the banker in the eye, and asked, "What do you have for collateral?" A downtown train, an English priest sat next to a drunken down-and-out character who was struggling to hold up and focus on his newspaper. As he looked over to the priest and in a slurred voice, the drunk asked, "Excuse me, father, do you know what arthritis is?" The priest thought this was a great opportunity to lecture the fellow and replied, "It's a disease caused by a sinful life, too much boozing, drug-taking, wild living, and other unmentionable things." The drunk nodded and went silent, widened his eyes, and went back to reading his newspaper. A little later, the priest, feeling he may have been a bit too harsh, tried to soften things and asked, "How long have you had arthritis, my son?" The drunk replied, "I don't have arthritis. It says here in the paper that the Pope has it." An old woman rode into a dusty town and tied her mule to the hitching rail. As she dusted off her clothes, a young cowboy stumbled out of the saloon with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a revolver in the other. He looked at the old woman and said, "Hey there, old lady, you ever danced?" She looked at him calmly and said, "No, I can't say that I have." He smirked and said, "Well, you're about to learn." Then he started firing his gun at the ground near her. Not wanting to lose a toe, the old woman started hopping around while the crowd laughed and the cowboy kept shooting. When he ran out of bullets, he laughed, spun his gun, and started to walk away. The old woman calmly walked over to her mule, reached into a saddlebag, and pulled out a double-barreled shotgun. She cocked both hammers, and the loud click echoed down the street. Everything went quiet. The cowboy stopped, slowly turned around, and found himself staring straight down the barrels of that shotgun. The old woman looked at him and said, "Son, have you ever kissed a mule?" The cowboy swallowed hard and said, "No, ma'am, but I'm willing to learn." A few lessons from the Old West. Don't be arrogant. Don't waste your ammunition. Whiskey can make you think you're smarter than you are. Always know who you're dealing with, and never mess with old folks, 'cause they didn't get old by being foolish. Old Farmer Ray from Pine Hollow stopped by Walt's repair shop to get his pickup fixed. They told him it would take a few hours, so he decided to walk home. On the way, he stopped at Billy's Hardware and bought a bucket and a gallon of paint. Then he went over to Carter's feed store and picked up 2 chickens and a goose. Standing there with a bucket, paint, 2 chickens, and a goose, Ray scratched his head trying to figure out how he was going to carry everything home. Just then, a sweet little old lady named Edna walked up and said she was lost. "Can you tell me how to get to 742 Willow Lane?" she asked. "Well," Ray said, "my place is right near there. I'd walk you over, but as you can see, my hands are full." Miss Edna thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you put the paint inside the bucket, carry that in one hand, tuck a chicken under each arm, and carry the goose in the other?" "Well, that's a mighty fine idea," Ray said, and off they went. About halfway there, Ray said, "Let's take a shortcut through this alley. It'll get us there quicker." Miss Edna stopped and looked at him carefully. "Now, listen here, Mr. Ray. I'm an old widow, and I live alone. How do I know you're not going to push me up against the wall, kiss me hard, lift my skirt, and make wild, passionate love to me?" Ray started laughing and said, "Ma'am, I'm carrying a bucket, a gallon of paint, 2 chickens, and a goose. How in the world could I possibly do that?" Miss Edna smiled and said, "Well, you could set the goose down, put the bucket over him, and set the paint on top so he can't get out, and I'll hold the chickens." A very pregnant woman got on a bus and noticed a young man across from her smiling. She felt uncomfortable and moved to another seat. A moment later, she noticed he was still smiling. Actually, now he was grinning, so she moved again. When she moved the 4th time and he burst out laughing, she was so upset that she reported him and he ended up in court. The judge asked the young man to explain himself. He said, "Your Honor, when she first got on the bus, she sat under a sign that said, 'The Doublemint twins are coming,' so I smiled. Then she moved and sat under a sign that read, 'Logan's Lidament reduces swelling,' so I had to smile again. After that, she moved under a deodorant advertisement that said, 'William's Big Stick did the trick,' and I was really trying not to laugh. But when she moved one more time and sat under a sign that read, 'Goodyear rubber could have prevented this situation,' I just couldn't help it." Case dismissed. Not having a lady in his life, a young male hawk was desperate for a little love action. From his perch in the woods, he spotted a dove. So he swooped down, carried the dove into the bushes, and soon there was plenty of noise, flapping wings, and sounds of amorous noises. After a minute or so, the dove staggers out, feathers ruffled, and said, "I'm a dove, and I've been loved." But the hawk wasn't satisfied, so next he found a lark. Once again, into the bushes they went, more flapping wings and amorous noises. Out came the lark, smiling, saying, "I'm a lark, and I felt the spark." Still, that wasn't enough. Finally, the hawk spotted a duck and swooped down. By now, all the animals in the woods were watching, knowing exactly where this was headed. The bushes shook harder than ever before, crashing, thrashing, feathers flying everywhere. Moments later, the hawk staggered out, missing feathers, sporting a black eye, and clearly regretting his last choice. From inside the bushes, the duck called out, "I'm a drake, and you made a mistake." A funeral director once hired a bagpiper to play at a graveside service for a homeless man who had no family or friends. The burial was to be taking place in a small cemetery way out in the countryside, the very first person to be laid to rest there. Not familiar with the back roads, the bagpiper got hopelessly lost, and, being a typical man, he refused to stop for directions. By the time he finally found the place, it was an hour late. He saw a backhoe parked around a freshly dug hole and a few workers eating their lunch there. But no hearse, no mourners, no funeral director. Feeling terrible, he got out, apologized to the crew, and walked over to the open grave. The vault lid was already in place. He told the workers, "I won't hold you up long, but this feels like the right thing to do." The men gathered around, still eating their sandwiches, as the bagpiper began to play. He poured his heart and soul into every note. "Going home, the Lord is my shepherd, flowers of the forest." By the time he finished with amazing grace, the workers were openly weeping. The bagpiper nodded respectfully, walked back to his car, and began to drive away. Just as he opened the door, he overheard one of the workers say, "Well, I'll be darned. 20 years of digging septic tanks, and now it's a first." Tom and Lisa had just gotten married, but they couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent their first night together at Tom's parents' house. The next morning, little Billy, Tom's little brother, was heading off to school. He asked his mom, "Are Tom and Lisa up yet?" She said, "No, not yet." Billy smirked and asked, "Do you know what I think?" His mom cut him off immediately. "I don't want to hear what you think, you chicky little boy. Now get to school." At lunchtime, Billy came home and asked again, "Are Tom and Lisa up yet?" She replied, "No." Billy grinned and said, "Do you know what I think?" "Billy, I said I don't want to hear it. Eat your lunch and get back to school." After school, Billy burst through the door and asked, "Are Tom and Lisa up yet?" His mom sighed. "No, Billy, they're still not up." Billy said, "Do you know what I think?" Exasperated, she finally threw her hands up and said, "All right, what do you think? And it better not be something rude." Billy grinned and said, "Well, last night Tom came into my room to borrow my Vaseline, and I think I gave him my airplane glue." A cop pulls over a blonde for speeding. When he gets up to the window, he asks for her license and registration. "What's a license?" she asks, so the cop explains what a license is. The blonde quickly says, "Oh, I have one of those," and hands it over to the cop. "I also need registration," reminds the cop. "What's a registration?" she asks, so the cop explains what a registration is to her. "I have one of those," she says as she grabs it and hands it over. So the cop takes the license and registration back to his car to write up the ticket. As he's writing up the ticket, he tells his partner how dumb this blonde is. His partner thinks a minute and says, "When you take the ticket to her, give her everything, then drop your pants to see what her reaction is." So the cop finishes writing up the ticket and heads back to the blonde. He hands her her license, registration, and the ticket, then drops his pants. The blonde looks confused for a second, then her face falls. Oh no, not another breathalyzer test. I had lunch with two of my unmarried friends, one engaged, one a longtime girlfriend, while I've been married for over 20 years. We started talking about spicing things up and decided we'd each surprise our men by greeting them at the door wearing a black bra, stiletto heels, and a little mask over our eyes. We agreed to report back in a few days. My engaged friend said, "On the night my fiancé came over, I greeted him in a black lace outfit, tall heels, and the mask. His eyes went wide and he said, 'You are the woman of my dreams. I love you.' Then we had the most romantic night ever." The girlfriend said, "Same here. I surprised my partner at his office. Under my coat, I was wearing just the bra, the heels, and the mask. When he saw me, he just froze, then swept me into his arms. We spent the whole evening together." Then they both looked at me. I said, "Well, when my husband came home, I was waiting in my black bra, stockings, stilettos, and the mask. He opened the door, looked at me from head to toe, and said, 'What's for dinner, Zorro?'" The Smiths were unable to have children, so they decided to use a surrogate father. The day he was supposed to arrive, Mr. Smith kissed his wife goodbye and said, "Well, I'm off. The man should be here soon." About 30 minutes later, purely by chance, a door-to-door baby photographer rang the doorbell, hoping to make a sale. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "I've come to—" "Oh, no need to explain," she interrupted, blushing. "I've been expecting you." "You have?" the photographer said, pleasantly surprised. "Well, excellent. Babies are my specialty." "That's exactly what my husband and I were hoping for," she said. "Please come in." They sat down, and after a moment, she asked shyly, "So where do we start?" "Oh, don't you worry," he said. "I usually try 2 in the bathtub, 1 on the couch, and maybe a couple on the bed. The living room floor can be fun too. You can really spread out down there." "The bathtub? The floor? No wonder nothing ever worked for my husband and me," she said, startled. "Well, ma'am, no one can guarantee a perfect one every time," he said, "but if we use enough positions and I shoot from 6 or 7 angles, I'm sure you'll be happy with the results." "That sounds like a lot," she whispered. "In my line of work, you can't hurry it," he said. "I'd love to be in and out in 5 minutes, but you'd be disappointed." "Don't I know it," she muttered. He opened his briefcase and showed her a portfolio. "This one was taken on top of a bus," he said proudly. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, hand to her throat. "And these twins came out great, especially considering how difficult their mother was." "She was difficult?" Mrs. Smith asked. "Oh, yes. In the end, I had to take her to the park. People were crowding around 4 and 5 deep just to watch. 4 and 5 deep? Mrs. Smith said, eyes wide. Yes, he nodded, and for more than 3 hours. The mother was squealing the whole time. I could hardly concentrate, and once the squirrels started nibbling on my equipment, I had to pack it up. Mrs. Smith leaned in. They actually chewed on your equipment? I'm afraid so. Well, if you're ready, I'll set up my tripod so we can get started. Tripod? Mrs. Smith whispered. Oh, yes, ma'am. I need the tripod to hold my cannon. It's far too big to hold steady for very long. Mrs. Smith fainted on the spot. An attractive young woman on a flight from Ireland turned to the priest sitting next to her and said, "Father, may I ask a favor?" "Of course, my child. What can I do for you?" he replied. "Well, I bought my mother a very expensive hairdryer for her birthday. It's still unopened, but it's way over the customs limit. I'm afraid they'll confiscate it. Would you be willing to carry it through customs for me, maybe under your robes?" The priest smiled gently. "With my honest face, Father, I'm sure no one will suspect a thing." "With your honest face, Father," she said, "no one will suspect a thing." When they reached customs, she let the priest go first. The customs officer asked, "Father, do you have anything to declare?" The priest said, "From the top of my head down to my waist, I have nothing to declare." The officer frowned at the unusual answer, then asked, "And what do you have to declare from your waist to the floor?" The priest replied, "I carry a marvelous instrument designed for a woman's use, and as of today, it is still completely unused." The customs officer burst out laughing and waved him through. "Go on, Father. Next." A traveler became hopelessly lost in the middle of a vast desert. Realizing his only chance was to find civilization, he began walking. Hours passed. He grew thirsty, then weak, then dizzy. Eventually, he collapsed to his hands and knees, crawling across the hot sand. Just as he was about to pass out completely, he spotted a small shack far in the distance. Using every bit of strength he had left, he dragged himself to the door and gasped, "Water, please, I need water." The old man stepped out and said kindly, "I'm very sorry, sir. I have no water, but would you like to buy a tie?" He held up a beautiful rack of silk neckties. "You idiot," the traveler groaned. "I'm dying. I need water." The old man nodded and said, "Well, if you really need water, there's another shack about 2 kilometers south of here. They'll have some." Somehow, nobody knows how, the traveler managed to crawl the full 2 kilometers. Moments from death, he pulled himself up to the second shack and knocked weakly before collapsing. A man who looked like the first one, only dressed in a fancy tuxedo, opened the door and politely said, "May I help you, sir?" "Water," the traveler whispered. The man shook his head and replied, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir, but you can't come in here without a tie." Little Johnny saw his daddy's car passing the playground and going into the woods. Curious, he follows the car and sees Daddy and Aunt Jane kissing. Johnny finds this so exciting and can barely contain himself as he runs home and starts to tell his mother excitedly, "Mommy, Mommy, I was at the playground and saw Daddy's car go into the woods. I went to look and Daddy was giving Aunt Jane a big kiss. Then he helps her take off her shirt. Then Aunt Jane helped Daddy take his pants off. Then Aunt Jane lay down on the seat. Then Daddy..." At this point, Mommy cut him off and said, "Johnny, this is such an interesting story. Suppose you save the rest of it for supper time. I want to see the look on Daddy's face when you tell it tonight." At the dinner table, Mommy asks Johnny to tell his story. He describes driving the car into the woods, the undressing, laying down on the seat, and then Daddy and Aunt Jane did that same thing Mommy and Uncle Jack used to do when Daddy was in the army. A retired school teacher and an old farmer wander into a small-town bakery one morning. As they look over the pastries, the school teacher notices a tray of warm rolls on the counter. In a blink, he slips 3 rolls into his jacket pockets and calmly walks toward the door with a proud little smirk. Outside, he leans over and whispers, "Now that's talent. Did you see how I took those rolls without anyone noticing? That's real skill." The farmer chuckles and shakes his head. Skill? That's just plain stealing. Let me show you how to get the same result using good old-fashioned charm. Curious, the schoolteacher follows him back inside the bakery. The farmer strolls up to the owner and says, "Good morning, sir. How would you like to see a simple magic trick?" The owner raises an eyebrow, intrigued. "A magic trick? Sure, let's see it." The farmer smiles and says, "For this trick, I'll need 3 of your best rolls." The owner hands him 1 roll, which the farmer promptly eats. He asks for a second one and eats that one too. Then he asks for a third and eats it as well. When he's finished, he stands there smiling happily. The owner folds his arms and says, "All right, where's the magic? All I saw was you eating my rolls." The farmer points at the schoolteacher and says, "Check his pockets." A 15-year-old Amish boy and his father were visiting a mall for the very first time. They were amazed by everything they saw, but nothing fascinated them more than 2 shiny silver walls that moved apart and then slid back together. "Father, what is that?" the boy asked. His father, who had never seen an elevator in his life, said, "Son, I have never seen anything like this. I have no idea." As they stood watching, an older woman in a wheelchair rolled up to the mysterious doors and pressed a button. The walls opened, she wheeled herself inside, and the walls closed again. The lights above the doorway began to blink in order, one number after another. They stared in amazement as the numbers reached the top, then began moving in reverse. Finally, the silver walls opened again, and out stepped a stunning 24-year-old blonde. The father, still staring, leaned toward his son and whispered, "Son, go get your mother." A man walks into a bar and bets the bartender $50 that he can bite his own eyeball. The bartender laughs and agrees. The man takes out his glass eye, puts it in his mouth, and bites it. The bartender groans and hands over the $50. Then the man says, "I'll bet you $500 I can bite my other eyeball." The bartender thinks, "No way, he's not blind," and agrees. The man pulls out his dentures, pops them in, and gently bites his other eyeball. Now the bartender is furious, but he pays the $500. The man orders a beer, walks away, then comes back with one more challenge. "I'll bet you $1,000 that I can run across the bar and pee directly into that shot glass. 2 attempts." The bartender, certain this is impossible, jumps at the bet. Attempt number 1, the man misses completely. The mess goes everywhere except the shot glass. Attempt number 2, same result, not one drop in the glass. The bartender celebrates. He finally won. Suddenly, a man sitting in the corner slams his hand on the table and groans loudly. The bartender asks, "What's the matter with you?" The man says, "That guy just bet me $10,000 that he could make a mess all over your bar and that you'd be happy about it." After a couple of glasses of wine at lunch, 2 elderly women were driving home at a large car. Being on the shorter side, as many older ladies are, neither could see very well over the dashboard. As they cruised along, they approached an intersection. The light was red, but they went straight through it. The woman in the passenger seat thought, I must be imagining things. I could have sworn that light was red." A few minutes later, they approached another red light and drove right through that one too. Now she was getting nervous. She sat up as tall as she could and paid close attention. Sure enough, at the next intersection, they blasted right through a 3rd red light. The passenger couldn't take it anymore. She turned to her friend and said, "Agnes, did you know we just drove through 3 red lights in a row? You could have killed us." Agnes glanced over and said, "Oh dear, am I driving?" Tom had been in business for 25 years, and the stress finally got to him. So he quit, packed up his life, and bought 50 acres of land in the wilds of Alaska, as far from people as he could possibly get. He only saw the mailman once a week and made a grocery run maybe once a month. Other than that, it was pure peace and quiet. After about 6 months of total isolation, there was a knock at his cabin door. Tom opened it and found a huge bearded man standing there. "Name's Cliff," he said. "I'm your neighbor about 40 miles up the road. I'm having a Christmas party Friday night. Thought you might like to come by around 5. Tom was thrilled. "After half a year out here alone, I'd love to meet the locals. Thank you." Cliff nodded, turned to leave, then paused. "Gotta warn you, there'll be some drinking." Tom shrugged. "Not a problem. After 25 years in business, I can handle my liquor." Cliff nodded, walked a couple steps, then turned back. "Might be some fighting, too." Tom said, "I'm pretty easygoing, I'll be fine." Cliff started off once more, then stopped again. "And, well, might be some wild sex." Tom's eyes lit up. "After 6 months alone, I'm definitely coming. By the way, what should I wear?" "Doesn't much matter. It's just going to be the two of us." Carl is in the 10th year of a life sentence when he gets a new cellmate, Jim. After taking some time to size Jim up and decide that he can trust him, Carl tells Jim about his plan to escape. "So you see, for the first 5 years I was inside, I trained my digestive system to follow my command. Now I can eat something and it comes out broken down into its components." Jim is skeptical, but intrigued. Carl continues, "For the last 5 years, I've been swallowing pieces of my uniform. It's perfect because the guards just think it's rats chewing on it." So Jim asked, "Well, what does that have to do with me? How can I help?" Carl says, "Well, the pieces of fabric come out as individual fibers. I figure by this time next year, we'll have enough to fashion enough rope to get over the wall. I just need you to tie the fibers." Jim, disgusted, says, "You have got to be kidding me." And Carl says, "I shit you not." A young doctor moved to a small Midwestern town to take over for a family doctor who was retiring. Before leaving, the older doctor suggested the young one join him on his rounds so everyone could meet the new face. At the first house, an elderly woman complained of stomach trouble. The older doctor said, "You're eating too much fruit. 1 or 2 servings a day is plenty." After they left, the young doctor asked, "You didn't even examine her. How did you know?" The older doctor smiled and said, "I dropped my stethoscope on purpose. When I bent down to pick it up, I saw a pile of banana peels in the trash. That told me everything I needed to know." The young doctor nodded and said, "Pretty smart. I'll try that on the next patient." They soon arrived at another house and spoke with a tired-looking woman. She said she felt exhausted and a bit down all the time. The young doctor said, "You're probably overdoing it with church activities. Try slowing down." As they walked out, the older doctor said, "I know her well, and that's likely right. But how did you figure it out so fast?" The young doctor grinned and said, "Same way you did. I dropped my stethoscope, and when I bent down, I noticed the preacher under the bed." Fred had been suffering from terrible headaches for over 20 years. Finally, he went to see a specialist. After a long examination, the doctor said, "Fred, the good news is I can cure your headaches. The bad news is it will require castration. You have a rare condition where your testicles press against your spine, causing severe headaches. Removing them is the only way to relieve the pressure." Fred was stunned and devastated, but after years of pain, he agreed to the surgery. When he left the hospital, he felt strange and incomplete, but for the first time in decades, he had no headache. As he walked down the street, he decided he needed a fresh start, a new life, maybe even a new wardrobe. He passed a men's clothing store and thought, why not? He walked in and told the salesman, "I'd like a new suit." The elderly tailor looked him over and said, "You're a 44 long." Fred laughed. "That's right. How did you know?" "Been in the business 60 years. Fred tried on the suit. It fit perfectly. "How about a shirt?" the tailor asked. Fred nodded, and the tailor studied him again. 34 sleeve, 16.5 neck. Amazing. Exactly right. Been in the business 60 years. After trying on the perfect shirt, Fred walked around the store feeling better already. Then the tailor asked, "How about some new underwear?" "Sure," said Fred. The tailor looked him over and said, "Size 36. Fred laughed loudly. "Got you there. I've worn size 34 since I was 18. The tailor shook his head and said, "You can't wear size 34. Size 34 would press your testicles right up against the base of your spine and give you one terrible headache."